Yep, there they come. While everybody is signing in, we are live, and as soon as the sign-in quits rolling in, we will begin. Welcome to the TFEA COVID-19 Task Force webinar. We are just getting signed in. I'm going to go ahead and introduce Penny and the program, and then send out a couple of notes to people that are having trouble signing in. So welcome to the webinar Control Freaks Anonymous. I think that is something that most of us can all relate to in some fashion. If you have questions, please go to the Q&A box and type it in. We'll be watching for those questions, or the chat box. The Penny Ray is, excuse me, Penny, I'm so sorry. Penny McBride is the president and CEO of the Fredericksburg Chamber of Commerce, and has been doing that for about 14 years, if I'm right, I think. I chose not to do the bio because most everybody knows Penny, but a lot of things that Penny leaves out of her bio, I'm going to share just a tiny bit of that. She loves to travel. She's a kind, generous person who helps everyone along the way, and I have to tell you, she's the best friend I've ever had. So I'm going to turn it over to Penny and the Control Freaks Anonymous.
Well, Kay, thank you so kindly. You're always far more gracious in my introduction than I deserve, but I am so happy to have it. And thank you for the opportunity to be with members today and for your friendship. So yeah, as Kay mentioned, welcome to Control Freaks Anonymous. And about 3 years ago, I had the idea for this session, and I called up Steve Schmader, the CEO of the International Festival and Event Association, and I ran it by him, and he said, yeah, I like it, go ahead and do it. And he put it on the convention lineup that year for the International Convention, and it was the highest rated session that year. I'm not sharing that with you as a means of boasting, but I'm sharing that with you because to me, it really spoke to the relevance of the topic to our industry and the need for the topic in terms of both our personal development and our organizational development. And so to get us started a little bit, I wanted to describe kind of my thought process in putting this session together. So in our industry today, we need to be in control, right? We are in charge of a lot of people. The safety and well-being of a whole lot of lives rests squarely upon our shoulders when we do our events. Not only the guests that come to our event, but our team members, our volunteers, our vendors, and the like. So that's a big responsibility. And we also need to be in control of the finance of our event. You know, some of our budgets of our events are quite significant and have very significant downstream effects as well within our community. We need to be in control of our reputation, right? The reputation of our event, the reputation of the organization that produces it, and also the reputational effect that it may have on the destination in which we take place. So it is really important for us as event professionals to be in control. And you learn a lot through TFEA and IFEA about the best practices and project management practices that help us maintain control. So that's the healthy side of our business. What I think is the unhealthy side of our business, and what I'll spend my time today talking about, is when you cross over from being in control to being a control freak. And, you know, some people in our business kind of like to brag about that, you know, like, oh my God, I'm such a control freak. And I think they mean that in the real tongue-in-cheek, lighthearted way. But, you know, when we really become control freaks to the point that it becomes really poisonous and toxic, both to our own health and our organizational health, then we have to think back on how we kind of cross over and make some changes. And so I kind of used this fun picture. It didn't work so well on my dating profile for whatever reason, but it does make sense to me here is that, you know, we don't have to eat the whole thing in one bite, right? We have to have a team of people helping us. And so my comments today are kind of around that. So when I hit up Steve Schmader about doing this topic, I'm sorry, I'm having a little bit of trouble getting my slide to advance. Let's try that. Thank you. When I told him this, I kind of had the idea of doing it like Alcohol Anonymous with 12 steps, but I could only think of 8 steps. So that's where we landed at today, the 8 steps that I think will help us to control or to curb our inner control freak tendencies. And so the first one, just like in Alcoholics Anonymous, is admitting it's the first step. And when I say admitting it, I said, I think that is to kind of sometimes push back, sometimes to just take that deep breath, to take that moment to reflect and say, am I giving things my best right now? Am I using our industry accepted best practices to be in control? Or am I being a control freak that drives other people away? And when you kind of can start understanding and taking an honest assessment of yourself of when, you know, you're kind of crossing that line, to me, that's the first way that you start making meaningful progress within your organization. And so you might be the control freak in your organization. You might be on this webinar because there's someone in your organization that's a control freak that you're trying to figure out how to manage. You might be sitting right next to the person that drives you nuts as a control freak right now, and you're sitting on your hands to avoid pointing at them, and that's all okay too. You might be wondering, so we have to kind of think about why are people control freaks? Because I think when you understand the motivations behind what either drives you to that behavior or drives others to that behavior, it's useful. And in this word cloud, in the center one, you're going to see that I have perfectionism as the number one, because I think I see that a lot. And having worked with event professionals as a trainer all across the country, is that we are perfection oriented, right? And that's kind of what makes us good at what we do. So a healthy measure of that is not a bad thing. But where it becomes a bad thing is when, you know, you can't accept falling short of the mark in someone else, or you cannot accept something because it's never good enough for you. And the other flip side of this, something I struggle with personally from time to time, is that sometimes projects linger on my desk way longer than they should, because I keep trying to refine them and make them better. And sometimes it's okay to say, you know what? Good is okay, right? This is good enough to go out the door. This is good enough to work. I have another run at it next year, but I don't need to continue to make myself and other people crazy by trying to make it perfect. Another reason that people become a control freak is that maybe they fear not being good enough. And this is kind of an interesting one, because just in the past maybe 6 months or so, there's 2 women I work with in Fredericksburg that I both find to be probably some of the smartest, most competent and confident women I've ever come across. And both of them has disclosed to me that they sometimes fear that they're not good enough, and that one of these days they're going to wake up and everybody's going to realize that they're one great big imposter. And it shocked me to hear both of the women say that. But in, you know, kind of working with them and talking through that with them as a friend, I have seen that when they both kind of put their foot down, and get a little aggressive with things, it's usually that they're trying to mask this fear that maybe they don't think they're good enough themselves and other people will see that. So that might be something that drives our behavior. There's also the fear of the unknown, and Lord knows we have had a healthy measure of the unknown in 2020, right? So some of my other workshops that I do, if you've ever heard me present before, I talk a lot about how, you know, we really shouldn't be caught off guard in events, because most of the things that can go wrong, we can guess what they are. We don't know the timing, we don't know the severity, but we can kind of guess. So event cancellation should be one of the things that we could guess would happen. But yet, who in their wildest dreams would have thought that something would happen that would have pretty much forced virtually every event in the United States and even globally into a cancellation or delay situation? So sometimes I think we double down on controlling behaviors because we're just scared, right? We don't know what's going on. A lot of people too, I think, kind of get into that control freak side of their personality because of a dislike of vulnerability. And, you know, I think event planners tend to be really compassionate and empathetic people, but they tend to be really hard on themselves. And I think that's because it's tough sometimes to be vulnerable, right? It's tough when things are going wrong and you really don't know what to do. You don't want to show that. So you can overcompensate because of that. Maybe you have some difficulty trusting your team, and that's something that you can work through. And then the final reason I think of sometimes people are control freaks is narcissism. And my experience is there's no fixing this. You know, if you have a person on your team that truly has narcissistic tendencies, that's going to be a tough one. And I guess my advice is, you know, when I have somebody that really thinks might lean in that fashion, I kind of really try to distance myself a little bit because that's a hard one to get around. So I'm going to use some quotes throughout the presentation. And this one is from my late mother, Jo McBride. And, you know, she's kind of showing her sense of humor a little bit when she said this, but she'd always go, you know, I'm totally flexible, provided everything's exactly the way I want it. And I shared this with you because I think we see that a lot sometimes too in control freaks, is that's the person that's constantly telling you, yeah, I'm totally open to new ideas. Yeah, I'd love to look at different ways of doing things. Of course, we should change things up. But on the flip side of that, they're saying all the right things, but on the opposite side of that, everything about their actions and the way they go about things is just the polar opposite, right? And so when we do that, when we say that we're flexible, but we do everything in our power to control the situation, well, the effect is it simply makes people crazy and a little bit fearful. And it's dangerous because you're introducing an element of risk that doesn't have to be there, right? It makes people uncertain of the behavior that you're going, or the path that you're going to choose to take. And that can be something that really ripples down through your team in terms of fear and distrust, and maybe just downright make you crazy. So you may ask me, where do I fall on the worry meter myself, or where do I fall on the control meter? Honestly, at this season of my life, my biggest fear is that maybe I don't worry enough. I used to be a person that worried a whole lot more about things. As I've aged, I've tried to put things in two buckets. One, if it's not something that I can really influence the outcome, then there's no point in me burning a lot of time on it. You know, it is what it is. If it's something that I can influence the outcome, then it's up to me to think about constructive ways to do that. And I think for us to have that kind of clarity in our lives, or those moments of clarity, it's great for us just to find a good place to think. And I'm sharing this photo with you because this is my thinking spot. I tell Kay from time to time, yeah, after work today, it's been crazy, I'm gonna go to the river. So I live about a half hour from this spot. I throw my chair in the car, I grab a snack or something, and I just go sit in the water and think. And it's a great process for, you know, just releasing some of those things that we cannot have any influence over, and refocusing our energy on the things that we can do productively and well. And also, we don't have to worry about the world coming to an end because, in the words of the famous cartoonist Charles Schulz, it's already tomorrow in Australia. So we can always just release that from our plate of worries. So let me just take you through really quickly the things that we will cover in our time today in our 8 steps. Is as a reiteration, being detail oriented is essential. You cannot have a long running successful career in this industry if you are not on top of it, right? So we all know that. But when you come to the place where, being on top of it is controlling and makes you unkind to others, makes you unkind to yourself, makes you hard on yourself, then that can be really harmful, and we need to change. And when we make those changes, here are some of the benefits that we're going to get. Number one is you're going to have greater efficiencies. And just going back to what I showed you a moment ago with sitting in the river, when I can center myself and say, you know what, I'm not going to give any more bandwidth to things that are outside of my influence, then that frees up all of that time and space in my mind and my resources to work on things that I can influence. And so my efficiency, I find when I center myself like that, my efficiency really goes up much higher. Also transparency. So, if you've ever worked with someone who's a control freak, I'd be willing to bet that part of what frustrates you about that person is that they're not at all transparent. They keep things they play things very close to the vest. They don't freely share information. They parcel out information and resources and, just to do their own bidding. And that's uncomfortable. So when you can kind of step out of that role, it increases that transparency, which boosts trust, and all sorts of good things happen in the organization. It also increases sustainability. So I'm going to talk a lot deep in the presentation about succession planning, but we all have to understand that we're just cogs in a wheel, really, in the grand scheme of things. You may have designs on being in the event industry for the rest of your career. You may have designs on being at the same event or the same series of events for the rest of your career. Or maybe you're a very seasoned event planner that's been doing the same gig for a long time. But at the end of the day, you're not going to do it forever. And we all have a responsibility around making sure that there's another person to come along and do our job, and another person to come along and do other jobs. So the degree to which we're such a control freak that we don't bring on that new leadership, that can be a real damaging effect in our organization. Also, when we quit some of those behaviors, we're going to become much more agile. And finally, the biggest payoff is that communication improves. And if you ask any organization, whether it's high functioning or low performing, what the biggest problem they have is, I promise you, communication will be the most common response. And so for organizations that, consciously move away from some of these behaviors, that communication channel improves, and all sorts of good things stem from that. So you may be saying, okay, that's the nice philosophical side of all of this. What are those 8 steps, not 12? Remember, I couldn't think of 12, but what are those 8 steps of letting go and why they make sense? And so the first one is that we have to manage things and lead people. I love this one so much. It's why I made it number 1. Manage things, lead people. And this really kind of stern-looking woman in the slide her name is Dr. Grace Hopper, and she was a Rear Admiral in the Navy at the time of her retirement before she moved into the private sector. What she is really well known for is being one of the earliest, a pioneer, if you will, in the field of computer science. In fact, she began the basis of what became one of the primary computer languages, COBOL. She actually started that development of that in 1944. But she made this quote, and manage things, lead people. And if you read the rest of it, she writes, we went overboard on management and forgot about leadership in this organization, talking about the US Navy. And so I love this quote so much because in our industry, it's easy for us to say we've got lots of things to manage. And it's easy because we do, right? we have to be managers a good part of the time. And so when I say we're managers, some of the behaviors that managers exhibit is that we direct things, right? So I have the ability to look at Joe and say, hey, Joe, I need you to go, set up the blah, blah, blah area at the event. And you have the ability to go tell Joe what to do, because that's kind of the chain of leadership or in your organization. When managers managers are very focused on quantity, right? Managers are looking at the metrics of things. Managers want to maintain the status quo. So we all assume certain risks when putting our event together, and we do a risk assessment, and we have certain tolerances around risk. And so our job in managing the event is to try to keep everything happening within those accepted tolerances, right? During the event, we don't want a lot of surprises. I mean, our job is to try to make things flow as smoothly as possible and to follow and achieve, predetermined outcomes. We also need to ensure compliance. We have a lot of things that we're responsible for and compliance measures that we have to make sure that are followed. And so managers are primarily concerned with doing things right. But leaders operate differently. And one of the key differences, this whole difference between things and people, is that leaders inspire. So earlier I said, okay, I can go tell Joe to go out and do blah, blah, blah. But the much more compelling thing that I could be doing is to inspire Joe in a way that he knows what to do and wants to do it, right? Joe's behavior isn't dependent on Penny telling him what to do. Joe's behavior is dependent on being part of an organization that has enough communication that he knows his responsibilities, he wants to do them, and he goes out and makes it happen, right? And that's a leadership function. That relationship with Joe doesn't get forged by me telling him what to do. That's a relationship building function. So leaders value things instead of count things, right? Leaders have, invest in an organization in a very personal way. And leaders intentionally disrupt. So now there's a time for both, right? In the big middle of the event, you're not going to be out there trying to intentionally disrupt things. That's not a really healthy time to yank the wheel of the car. But throughout the other times, this is a really important function, is because if we're always maintaining the status quo, we're not growing, we're not changing, we're not observing the trends in our industry and the way our consumers are changing. So we have to step into that leadership mode and intentionally disrupt things. And one of the best ways we do that is by asking questions, lots and lots of questions. And we want to do the right thing, right? So you can see how those two sets of behaviors are kind of different. And you have to do both, right? You're always going to have a foot in each of these camps, but it is a conscious decision of, when you can really grow the organization and the people that around you by stepping into that leadership role instead of simply managing the situation. So my second step that I'd like to share with you today is to delegate authority and not delegate tasks. Delegating authority and not delegating tasks. So what I mean by that is, it's kind of the example I gave you with our friend Joe a moment ago, is that, I'm not going to just hand Joe a checklist and say, come back to me when you've checked all of these things off. Rather, I'm going to delegate the authority that goes along with that. And that's a hard thing for the control freak, because the hardcore control freak likes the ability to say, well, I only want Joe to complete the checklist. I don't want him to deviate. I don't want him to do something differently. But you know what? The times in my life where I really have just kind of let go and let somebody else run with something, more often than not, I've led to what I call one of these holy crap moments where they've built a better mousetrap. Not only did they succeed, but they did it far beyond my expectations and probably even far beyond what my abilities were. And it is so inspiring when you see that happen, when you see someone that really is able to take over and own it, if you will. So what does that look like? And there's, a difference between responsibility and authority. So delegating authority also means you have to delegate trust and the confidence and the ownership of the outcomes. So when I say delegate trust, sometimes I refer to this as like yo-yo leadership, where we give something to somebody and then we go, nope, I'm taking it back. And then we give it to them again. Nope, I'm taking it back. It's that constant act of second guessing, or that those undermining comments like, well, that's not how I would do it, or, well, I'm not sure that that's going to work. Sometimes we really have to trust. That's not to say that we're not keeping a watchful eye, but, those can quickly become kind of really self-defeating behaviors. And that authority also means confidence and ownership of outcomes. So whether that person succeeds or whether they fail, being a good leader means helping them own that. And, if I ask you to think back in your career and I'd say, tell me about a time that you really grew in your personal leadership by something that went well, I would suspect most of you would have a hard time coming up with an example. But if I were to say, come up with a time or share with me a time that your personal leadership style grew because of something you messed up or something that failed or something that went wrong, I bet you guys would all start talking like maniacs, right? More often than not, we learn and we grow and we get better because of small failures. And sometimes letting people own those outcomes is a great leadership development tool. But that, and also don't accept reverse authority. There will be those people that really come to you and they want additional authority. And then the minute something goes wrong, they want you to take it back. So if you're unwilling to take it back when things are going well, you also have to be willing to not take it back and always say, oh, don't worry about it, I'll fix it for you. That's not to say you're not going to counsel them, that you're not going to give them ideas and resources, that you're not going to support them. But if you constantly are willing to step in and fix things when they go wrong, you're not really building a team. But remember, at the end of the day, responsibility remains with you. So number 3 is we want to build our bench. Building our bench is a great way. So sometimes the world of a control freak is a very lonely place, right? And it's lonely either because the control freak has chosen to make it lonely by saying that there's no one else in the organization that can do anything as well as I can, or there's no one else in the organization that can do things to my standards or in the way that I want them done, that, they eventually drive off everyone, or they just choose not to play with others very well. And that's a really, really dangerous position for you to find yourself in, but more importantly, it's a dangerous place to lead your organization. So in my picture here, you're looking at the bench, the bench of the San Antonio Spurs. So I love the San Antonio Spurs. Primarily, I have just this very, mad crush on Tim Duncan, but I purposely didn't put him in the slide so I wouldn't get distracted today. But the Spurs' success, if you hear any of the, like Coach Popovich talk, or you hear the team ownership talk, or even if you hear some of their more popular players that have talked, one of the things that they've been really good at is building a deep bench. But I'm not just talking about a deep bench in terms of players, although that they've done that as well. But that bench that permeates throughout the entire culture. And I love this image most of all, because right in the middle of it is a woman, right? And the Spurs were the first to bring a female coach into the NBA and show that organizational depth. And so when I say build your bench, you're building your bench in terms of a lot of people that can each do more than one thing in the organization, but you're also building that cultural bench, right? That so from the top down, from the ownership structure of the Spurs down to the front office sales staff, there is a universal one culture that exists. And that's what we want to be striving to do with our team. And one of the reasons I think this is the most important is that we need to make sure that we have built a bench that can withstand adversity. And one of the most, one of the biggest challenges is, what if we get taken out of the game, right? What if something happens to us? If we've been a control freak that has obscured information, that has not built our other team members around us, who has not been trusting and communicative when we're out for whatever reason, that's really damaging the organization. So a number of years ago, I went on a week-long vacation, and it was the first time in a long time I'd chosen to take an entire week off. And I was a little unnerved about the trip because it was going to be the first time I took a vacation where no one outside of a major emergency would be able to get a hold of me, right? I wasn't going to have daily phone access. I wasn't going to have daily email access. So I prepared, you know, everything I thought could pop up, a lot is gone, and I left. And you know what? It was a fabulous week. I came back restored and regenerated in a way I had not felt in years. And I came back, and you know what? Everything was just fine. In fact, some things that happened while I was gone, I'm like, oh my God, that's even better than you know, anything I would have come up with. And I came to the conclusion that if my team can't play when I'm gone, then I'm a lousy coach, right? I am not doing the organization any favors if I'm a control freak to the degree that I have to be there all the time for outcomes to be successful. So, you know, ever since that year now, I take off, you know, a couple, 3 weeks every year where I'm pretty much off the radar entirely. And it's good for me and it's good for my organization. And there's nothing more gratifying than coming back and your team being excited about the fact that they did something good. That is seriously cool. So when I talk about your festival's bench, there's a couple of things I want you to take from that, or areas I want you to work on. So the first place that you need to build a deep bench is within your board. Now, I didn't take a chance to look at who's called in today in advance, so I apologize for that. I don't know who else here, but I suspect some of you might work for like Parks and Recreation departments or governmental entities. So you perhaps have an advisory board, but you don't have a governing board. And chances are you don't have a lot of control over who gets on the board. So some of this may not be as relevant to you. But for those of you on the call who work in an organization like mine and where I have most of my career, I've almost always worked for some sort of a governing body. Board of directors, and who gets on that board is absolutely critical, because that board is really going to have a large role in establishing the culture within your organization. They're going to have a very large role in setting the priorities and looking down. You know, one of their chief areas of responsibility is to say, I'm going to look way down at the horizon and say, what do I think is coming up next? Staff's doing the day-to-day. The board's job is to really be in that strategic mode. So when I came to the chamber, I really kind of wanted to do some work around board development. And a lot of what I've done wasn't my idea by any stretch. I stole it from another board that I serve on that I thought did a really great job. So one of the things that we've done is we developed a skills matrix. And we said, what are the skills or the core competencies that we need at the board level to be a high functioning board? You know, maybe we need someone with a really deep understanding of finance. Maybe we have legal issues that we think we could use guidance on. Maybe we need someone who has the ear of the mayor, right? Someone who's very politically connected. Perhaps we definitely need some folks on that have connections within the community that can leverage those connections to bring us resources, increase sponsorships, and better political clout, more access to volunteers. And so we made a list of all of those and then plotted out, you know, which of our current board members fill which of those buckets, right? And then it was easy for us to visually see the areas that we needed to do work on in development of our board. Who do we need to now recruit to come on our board to fill some of those competencies that were being unserved at that time? And you might also consider in this matrix adding in diversity measures. So of course, diversity, we're probably all thinking today a lot of racial diversity, but there's other areas of diversity I think you should be talking about as well. Bottom line, diversity really means that you reflect the community that you serve, or you reflect the membership or the organization that you serve. So that can also mean gender diversity. It can mean economic diversity. You know, the board that I'm kind of taking most of this information from is a very affluent board. And, you know, I've been kind of a critic saying we need to recruit people that have a lesser economic status in the community, because they're people that our organization serves, and we need to have that representation in our board. And then also age diversity. And that's something I think, you know, you just go to TFEA conventions. A lot of times I look around and I see lots of younger people, and they're mostly paid staff people. And then I look around and I see older people, and they're mostly board members. And so how much age diversity do we have on our boards, and what are we doing to recruit younger talent? And sometimes that's a real rub, because we have lots of boards that don't have term limits. By the way, I'm a huge fan of term limits. I think that they should be in place. But you know, you might have somebody that's been doing the whatever for your festival for 30 years, and God love them for their passion and investment. But what happens when they don't want to do it anymore? Do we have a process where we're bringing up that next piece of talent? And that's a major control freak issue, because a lot of times what can happen at the board level is you have board members that have been there so long and are so embedded in the organization that they've built up their own little fiefdom, their own little control freak you know, area. And that can be really hard to bust through when you're trying to develop new talent. We've also beefed up our vetting process. We've become, you know, it's not just one call, hey, you know, Frank, would you be willing to serve on the board? It's a vetting process and a very detailed conversation and onboarding process. We also want board members that are fully engaged, meaning that I want that board member to be willing to bring their full-time attention and resources to the table. And I want them to be willing to leverage their sphere of influence to help get the event the things that it needs. And that also your board embraces whatever your governance model is. So in my own case, my board sets strategy. They oversee that the organization has the proper resources. They hire and fire me, but the day-to-day operations and who works on my team is totally in my lane. And so that's kind of how our governance model works. The next area of building a deep bench for our festival is our staff. So we have to have the right people, but not only the right people, but to have them doing the right jobs. And this can be, you know, this can be troublesome sometimes. You know, sometimes we might have to make some really difficult decisions around that. And bottom line too is if you have, you know, if you have a control freak in your midst and they're not a person that is going to be open to the right kinds of leadership development, you might have to make some difficult decisions. I mean, don't make them lightly, of course, but, and also that you train and cross-train staff. And I've seen this a few times, that when you start doing cross-training, meaning that everybody can do bits and pieces of other people's jobs, you know, it's really healthy for an organization. So, you know, Betsy is going to have her baby about the time the festival comes. You have other people that know how to pinch hit for Betsy if she's still on maternity leave, right? But what will happen is when you start really doing meaningful cross-training, you're going to find the control freaks, because they're the ones that are going to fight you on it. They're the ones that are going to say, oh no, that's what I do. And that, you know, that's going to be one of your big tricks, or to seeing who's resistant to that kind of change. And at the end of the day, you need to make sure everybody's empowered, that, you know, even if it's not my area of expertise, you know, we have empowerment, that we have the ability to make decisions. Volunteers kind of pretty similar to that. We have to think about, we have to manage our volunteers the way we manage staff to some degree, because we are responsible for them and their actions, right? So again, the right people in the right positions, properly trained and cross-trained, fully engaged again. And then we may not think about the community as being part of the festival's bench, but my gosh, they are, right? Because the community is where we find our volunteers. The community is where we find our sponsors, some of our vendors and suppliers, right? So the more that our festival is not just something that exists within the community, but is woven into the fabric of it, that's a really powerful place to be. So how well do we engage, and what is our strategy for making sure that we that we are an active member of the community? And that's how we get access to sphere of influence. That's how we can yield our political capital So that relationship making is very important. And you can't do that if you're a total control freak, right? It doesn't work, and it's a very limiting factor. And then finally, partners. And what I mean by that is that might be your sponsors, that might be other stakeholders that you work with, like maybe you're like myself, you're in a major tourism destination. So I view my hotel community and my restaurant people and my attraction people as very strong partners to the festival, because we're all part of that tourism experience. So, and the degree to which you can bring others to the table helps you leverage those resources, which is really very valuable. Okay, so now step number 4, my 4th step to control or to curb your control freakiness is to first trust to be trusted. Probably the thing you will see that, again, is a big, like flashing sign that someone's a control freak, maybe in a dangerous way, is if they really, really suffer from trust issues. So I picked this image because I would say, if I ask you to look at this image and say, would you rather be the guy with his arms outstretched ready to catch someone, or would you rather be the girl flying through the air hoping to be caught? Most event planners would identify with the guy in the photo, because we're very good at saying, I gotcha. We're rock solid. We're used to taking charge and making sure that we catch things when they fall, right? But not all of us are good at just taking that jump, that leap of faith into the air. But if we're never willing to trust, it is hard for us to be trusted, right? We might think that we're saying and doing all the right things for people to want to trust us, but our behaviors may not be consistent with what we're saying. So trust is, I think, first of all, is what you think about comes about. So if you are a person who routinely doubts whether other people are trustworthy, it could be a clue that you yourself are not trustworthy, right? Or that you have vulnerability issues that you need to think about. And those are so damaging in the kind of work that we do, right? If we don't have a team that we can trust, particularly if things go south, that's going to be a really limiting factor to the growth and development of our leadership, of our organization, and of our sustainability. We also have to be willing in our organization to allow failure. Now, granted, you want to avoid catastrophic failure anytime that you can. But again, there's not anything wrong with necessarily letting people fail. And there's nothing wrong with making people own the outcomes of that failure. Now, that sounds mean-spirited, and I don't want it to be. But, again, the degree to which you can fix things. So I like to tell the story about my father. Like, my father was a person who was very protective of me and very supportive of me, but he refused to be a problem solver. And when you told my father that something was wrong, he would always say, what do you want me to do about that? And I knew the answer would be nothing. And then he would follow that up. Now, what do you think you should be doing about that? And he was great at talking you through it and helping you ask you questions and explore your options. But he was never going to be the one that says, I think you should do this. And I think that's the kind of leader that we need to be in our organization. It helps people think through those options and grow their skill set. Another key element of trust is that we need to accept that there's usually more than one way of doing things. So the control freak is a creature of habit, right? That's the person that says, well, that's not how we usually do it here. Or, oh, I've tried that once, it didn't work. All of those are absolute trust busters when you say it. And usually, more often than not, there's another right way of doing things, or things that can lead to the same outcome. And our willingness to say, I'm going to let go of that as long as it yields the outcomes that we need, is going to make you a lot happier in terms of releasing your control freak tendencies. Because at the end of the day, we have to remember the absence of trust is toxic in an organization, and it doesn't get better, right? That's something that can be really corrosive and difficult to get past. Number 5, more why, less how. Maybe some of you on the call today have young children. And maybe some of those children have been cooped up for several months now with you because of COVID-19. So if I were to ask you, what does your kid do a lot? You were going to say they probably ask a lot of questions, right? Particularly young children, right? They're constantly peppering you with questions. And the reason they do that is they're learning, you know, they're experiencing things, they're seeing things, they're putting together new thoughts and new ideas. And because of that, they have a million questions, right? But somewhere in our life, we move past the point where that natural curiosity drives us, and we get to the place where we've learned enough now to tell others how to do things. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. But when we stay naturally inquisitive, naturally curious, that is a way that we can also fend off being a control freak. Because, you know, if you're constantly feeding your mind with new ways of doing things or new ideas, or you're questioning, or you're exhibiting what we talked about at the beginning of the presentation, being willing to intentionally disrupt things, that's where you really move the needle on making something new, exciting, and different happen. So leaders ask the question, more why questions, instead of just telling people how to do things. This is a quote from one of my very favorite authors, Dr. Stephen Covey. I use a lot of his stuff in my training workshops. And I love this quote. He says, if the ladder is not leaning against the right wall, every step we take just gets us to the wrong place faster, right? So are we asking that, you know, is our ladder even propped against the right wall, guys? You know, are we willing to kind of ask some really fundamental questions, and maybe some questions that, you know, intentionally shake things up, to track and make sure that we're really, you know, that we're doing things that move the needle on something. And so we have to spend as much time as possible in the why zone. Now, again, I get that there's times of year that you have more time to be in the why zone. And then the closer you get to the event, there's, you know, less opportunity to be in the why zone. So I understand all of that. We have to know when to do these things. But some of the things that you want to look for in trying to focus your organization in the why zone is, one, is your board is spending more time discussing strategy than operations. I really get annoyed in board meetings when we talk a lot about the day-to-day stuff, right? I jokingly tell my board before, I was like, I don't need you to decide between whether we should use blue or pink tickets, right? If you don't really think I'm capable of deciding blue or pink tickets, then you have the wrong executive director or the wrong CEO, right? I need you to be talking about whether we should even be selling tickets to begin with. And we've done some things at our board meetings that really intentionally focus them on talking strategy. One of those is we've eliminated all committee reports from our board meeting. We set up an online tool that allows our board members to file their committee reports. It's very easy, so they can just log in, they fill it in, and like a little form, an online form. It gets emailed directly to our system that we can compile for the board meetings. And then they're distributed to the board meetings and placed in the consent agenda. Now, if there's something that the committee's struggling with or something that the board wants to weigh in on, they can move that out of the consent agenda into an action item. That can happen, of course. But for the most part, we don't need for the committee to talk about everything they talked about in the committee at the board meeting. That's a colossal waste of time. The other thing that we've moved and spend a lot of time doing is that we prepare generative questions for our board meetings. And they can be something pretty straightforward. They can be something pretty wild. A generative question might have been, what would we do if the festival lost an entire year's worth of income? Well, guess what? That just happened for a lot of us. So when we have a board that really spends time talking about strategy instead of the day-to-day, boy, that's where good things happen, and you build that trust and you decrease that opportunity for the control freak to dominate the discussion. We also want to reward creativity as well as productivity. That's a great thing to be doing in the Y zone. Maybe you give a bonus for the biggest flop. I think it's, I can't remember if it's Google or Facebook, which one. I think it was Google. I read an article about that. They literally give a cash bonus to the biggest failure every year. And you might be thinking, why would we want to financially incentivize failure? But the thought process is they want people to be as creative as possible. And if they worry about something not working, they may not choose to pursue it, right? They may not invest time and energy in investigating an idea that seems most or least plausible, right? So by incentivizing that, they say, hey, get that idea out there, quickly assess whether it can fly or not. And if it can't, let it crash quickly. But we want to make sure that we continue to encourage that line of thinking. We also need a creation of a just culture so that, you know, if something's wrong, we want to know it's wrong, right? And we need to be able to have a team that can report things that are problematic. And that happens, you know, or I should say that doesn't happen when you're dealing with a control freak. Because a control freak can be so disruptive that no one's willing to tell them their pants are on fire, right? Because they don't want to see what the reaction's going to be. So we have to think about how do we create that just culture. And again, that intentional disruption that we talked about a couple of times already. Number 6 on my list of 8 is to decentralize knowledge. So if you were to think about the person that you've worked with that you thought was the biggest control freak, I'd be willing to venture that one of the things they did was intentionally withhold information. Right? They might be a person that told you something, but you had to ask the specific question to get that information. They're very guarded. They're the person that makes that wonderful committee notebook, but then will never give it to anybody else or let it be copied or shared. And that's behavior that's really, really frightening. So nobody really likes the dandelion when they're in the yard. But yet when you look at it, the dandelion's in a pretty incredible creation, right? It's this very fragile, very short-lived little flower, but the slightest puff of wind comes along and lifts all those little petals off and puts them other places and they grow. And that's kind of how we have to think about information within our organization is we want organization to kind of freely flow about, land on other people and start growing there, right? Instead, though, the control freak's not comfortable being a dandelion. The control freak wants to be a vault, right? The control freak wants to be the person that protects the information, keeps it all in one spot, and only allows access when needed or when people have the passcode, right? And that's really not helpful in what we're trying to do as a creative organization. So we have to figure out ways that we can decentralize knowledge. And that's super important to us. So the author Bruce Coville writes, control of the flow of information is the tool of the dictatorship. And that's pretty harsh language, but that's kind of what you see. So how do we decentralize knowledge in our organization? Again, cross-training is a big part of that. Do we have a central place where information lives? And now there's so many great technology solutions around that. We don't have to have a place where, that the one copy of everything lives in that one notebook that no one will give us access to. So we can use, technology platforms now, something as simple as a Google Docs site or whatever system you're comfortable with using, but places that everybody can log in and see the same things. In project management, can everybody look at your project management tracking and see where you're at and what percent of completion everybody's at and where things are at. The better you get at really having that, that's again where there'll be enormous growth in the organization. But I promise you the people that push back on you wanting to do that will be the control freaks. 7 is we want you to plan the pass off. And this is what I alluded to earlier is the succession plan. Organizations, I don't think talk about succession very often. Like the corporate world talks about it pretty heavily, but the nonprofit world is not very good at talking about succession. And governmental entities, I don't think are always that good about talking about succession either. And so, we're all, at some point in time, we're all going to want to do something different. So my friend Cindy said to me once at a family funeral, as best I can tell, none of us get out of this alive. And that's true. We all have to think about whether we think we're going to be doing this particular event or this particular career for another 3 to 5 years or for the rest of our lives. We have to be willing to look at this organization by saying, if I got hit by the bus tomorrow, the proverbial bus tomorrow, how would things move forward? And then we also have to look at succession as just what are going to be some of those natural outflows of talent. When is our, when are we going to have a board that times out? So look at this, the next time you're in your board meeting, or the next time you're with a big group of your significant volunteers, or maybe even at your event, look around and do a head count of who will still be around in 10 years. And when I say who will be around in 10 years, I don't necessarily mean someone, but it could be someone who might not be living in 10 years, or it might be that they've moved on and are in a different season of life. It may be that, it's a person that's on fire right now, but they work for a corporation that's going to transfer them. So they're not going to be at your event another 10 years. It could be a whole number of reasons. But when you look around and say who's still going to be here in 10 years, it's going to be kind of a sobering thing to say, I have work to do. I can't rely on, the same people who are, have this iron grip of things forever. And this is the place where, like, particularly, and that's one of the reasons I mention service limits on board, term limits, I'm sorry, I couldn't think of the word, is that, we kind of, a lot of our events, might have people who've been doing the same job and have had total authority over it for 30 years. And like, that's such a beautiful thing that they want to give us that amount of time. But we have to have a conversation with them about finding a successor and training a successor and imparting that body of knowledge that they work so hard to deliver. And sometimes what happens in these organizations is because that control freak is so domineering over that particular area of the event, that anybody that wants to try to get into it quickly leaves, because they just create this toxic environment. So we have to come up with ways in our succession planning that we don't let that happen. What are we doing to create a supply chain of leaders? How do we make sure, like in my community, we're old, right? We're just really old. I tell people all the time, I love living in Fredericksburg because at age 54, I'm still one of the youngest people in any place I go. But that's a problem, because we have to be more mindful of that supply chain of leaders. And how are we motivating those future leaders to step up into these roles? And does the culture of our organization support moving up? Do we have, do we embrace that, or do we have a whole lot of control freaks, each guarding their own individual fiefdom, that keeps new seeds of leadership from growing very well within our organization? And then my final suggestion for curbing your control freakiness is that you need to favor outcomes over checklists, right? So lots of control freak people are very satisfied when they get things off the list, right? That they're about, just going through the motions and getting all all the myriad things done that takes to be in control, right? But at the end of the day, again, it's kind of like the Stephen Covey quote, what if our ladder's not even propped up against the right wall? So we need to have some discussion about what are the outcomes, not just what are the deliverables, what is the productivity measures that we're using, but what are the measurements we're using to measure outcomes. And so maybe an outcome that we want to be thinking about for an event is, are we attracting different consumers? Are we replacing consumers who are aging out of our event? In this COVID year that we've had, maybe one of our outcomes is the degree to which we've been able to take our events or engage our customers virtually until the time an in-person event comes back again. And what happens at the end of this year when maybe we can slowly return to normal and have in-person events again, but we taught our consumer that there's this virtual experience, and some of them still want that. So we can't assume that some of the things that we've trained our customers to do, that they're just going to reverse course and be willing to go back to the old way of doing things because that's what we want, right? So we have to have some discussion, and that's part of that strategy thing that I talked to you about with your board or whoever your planning committee is to say, what are the outcomes that we value? What are the things at the end of the day that we would view as a success that the event did, not just in revenue outcomes, but in programming outcomes and engagement outcomes and sponsorship development outcomes. And when we become really focused on the outcomes, the checklists come naturally, right? So we have to think a little bit about that. Peter Drucker, another favorite author, said, you know, if you can't measure it, you can't change it. So what metrics are we using to really measure the success of our event? And you know, the control freak, again, is going to be sticking to the same outcomes. Well, I did this thing this number of times, you know, and I did it this many more number of times this year, so that's a success. And that may not be a success at all, right, if it didn't drive an outcome. So we have to have some discussion around, it's not just doing the same thing we've always done and maybe doing a little more of it than we've always done, but asking ourselves, should we even be doing that thing to begin with? So spend some time to think about what are you going to measure to gauge what the outcomes are, and are those measurements meaningful, and do they really speak to engagement, or are they just, you know, managing the checklist and not really building leadership? So those are my 8 things. Oh, I'm sorry, I did have a couple more comments around that. When we're measuring outcomes, a great question to ask ourselves is, does it matter, right? Like some of the things that we might track, they might give us an idea of consumption, but do they really drive outcomes, right? Can the metric be benchmarked? And what I mean by that is, how are we tracking against maybe a competitive set of other events? Because now, as the consumer has more and more entertainment options, it may be interesting for us to benchmark some of our metrics against like festivals, or even other similar entertainment options, meaning non-festivals within our marketplace. Will the outcome yield better decision, and who owns it, are some of the questions that you may want to answer in this particular strategy piece of the discussion. So now that is my 8 steps, and I've tried to leave a pretty healthy measure of time in case somebody has questions. And I think you can use either the Q&A box or the chat box to ask any questions that you might have, and Kay's going to help me monitor some of these as well. But if anybody has a question at this point in time, I'd be happy to answer it. And if I don't know the answer, I'll make something up and you'll never know the difference.
Okay, if anybody has questions, go ahead and get those listed now. And I want to, while you're writing questions, or you're looking or trying to figure out what you want to write, I will remind everybody that our next webinar will be 2 weeks from today, on August the 6th. I'll be announcing that early next week. We also, next week on July the 28th, we'll have our second TIMI Fast Track webinar. If you're not signed up for that, you're interested in getting signed up for that, please contact me by email or by phone, and I'll help you make that happen. We are in our final day of getting in our marketing awards, so that's kind of exciting. I always get excited when those things come in because I get to see a lot of cool stuff. And we'll keep you posted on how we're going to announce that. It looks like Penny, somebody just said, hi, Penny. I don't, oh, here's something from Mike Baxter. After all these years, you still wow me. Thank you, from Mike Baxter.
You wow me too, big guy.
So
he comes to Fredericksburg often. I think he might want, you know, like free dinner or something. So
okay, here's some more.
Copy the slides. Yeah, Kay has those, so she'll send those to you. Do you have any good reads on how to help us let go of our control issues? I'd be happy to take a stab at that. I don't have something I can necessarily just rattle off the top of my head, but let me just kind of take a quick look at my own bookshelf, and I'd be happy to email those to Kay as well. Any of the authors that I mentioned are great ones. I mean, Dr. Covey's books are old. I mean, Dr. Covey's not even, I guess Peter Drucker isn't living anymore either, but they're both just really outstanding. Anything by Jim Collins is outstanding. Good to Great is a really, really good read. But I'll look at some more contemporary titles as well, and I'll be happy to pop those over to Kay.
You will be able to see the webinar online. I just got up the July 9th one. I had an issue with YouTube. They just didn't work well with me this time, but it's up now, and you can see if you missed it last week, you can go online and see it. I don't have the slides posted, but you can watch them. I will try to have them posted before the end of the day. So that being said, anybody that has an idea for a webinar or has something they want more information on, please reach out, email me, text me, whatever. We take that very seriously and look for new and different ideas. So we'll keep them coming, keep everybody busy. If you're not, we can certainly, get you on a committee if you're interested. So reach out. We're here to help you. And Penny, I don't see any more questions at this time, but I do want to say thank you to Penny. She's always willing to step up and help out, and her sessions are amazing.
Well, you guys
always learn something.
You guys are very kind. I wish you God's greatest blessings and everything. Quit being a control freak, and if you need any help, get your river chair, come to Fredericksburg. We'll go to the special spot. I might bring something along for us to enjoy, and I'd love to have your company. So God bless. Chin up in this difficult year. We're in this together, and next year we're going to have an amazing TFEA conference, tell war stories, and quit being control freaks. Thanks, Kay.
Thank you, Penny, and thank everybody for joining us today. We'll see you in 2 weeks.